We are therians. Of course we get called furry.
We're therians. Of course, adults and kids bark at us.
We are therians. Of course we cannot see in our mask at all.
We're therians. Of course, we use filters for videos.
We're therians. Of course we get in high places just to wag our tail.
We're therians. Of course, we act dumb every day.
I'm stuck. We're therians. Of course we get stuck in the most highest place optional. I cannot get up.
We're therians. Of course. Wait. Okay. We're therians. Of course, adult man calls furries.
We're therians. Of course we do quads wherever we want and what we want.
We're therians. Of course, wherever we go, we wear our gear.
We're therians. Of course we always had that sediment face that never really faded away.
We're therians. Of course, we act dumb. Wait, I already said that. Of course, people ask us where we get our masks, and we are so proud to say we made them.
We're therians. Of course we go in public for no reason.
We're therians. Of course, we public ear.
We're therians. Of course we wear candy wherever we want.
We're therians. Of course, I make the candy.
We're therians. Of course we go out when it's fall because that stereotypes is more active.
We're therians. Of course, we want it to snow.
We're therians. Of course we cannot breathe in our mask.
We're therians, and we are really kind.
We're therians. Of course we put beads and blood on our shoes.
We're therians. Of course, we own Converse.
We're therians. Of course we always have that one stereotype that's uncommon.
We're therians. Of course, we have shifts.
We're therians. Of course we love wearing tails just because it makes us happy.
We're therians. Of course, we love creepypasta.
We're therians. Of course we like to start YouTube channels, but they never blow up.
Dang, that's sad. Anyways, we're therians. Of course, we play Roblox.
We're therians. Of course we like to randomly teleport.
We're therians. Of course, we go swinging and upside down.
We're therians. Of course our gear breaks everywhere we go.
Therians. Of course, we blur out our faces whenever we're recording.
We're therians. Of course we get called furry and shit. Now where's my bag?
We're therians. Of course, whenever we lower our voice, it means that there's kids.
We're therians. Of course we're always in the pride.
We're therians. Of course, we wear more than one tail.
We're therians. We always have that therian girlfriend or therian boyfriend to get us more better.
We're therians. Of course, you should hit that subscribe button.